Hey, good morning. Scott Luton, Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's live stream. Greg, how we doing?
I'm doing quite well. How are you doing, Scott?
We had some storms come through early this morning. The dogs were cowering. Lots of thunder. Now
Really?
it is gorgeous. It is absolutely gorgeous out here. So we're doing well.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it. It's let's see. We had thunder and lightning last night, so I'm in Atlanta,
Okay.
K-Town, as the kids call it. Um, and it's rained the last 2 days, which is great because my wife is still down at the beach and I'm supposed to be watering the plants. But since it keeps raining, I don't have to.
Well, hey, play by those rules, Greg. Play by
Simple
those rules.
pleasures, Scott. That's the secret.
That is a secret in life for sure. We were just talking with the team pre-show about some different ways that we all cope with the stresses that the world brings us, and they had lots of different suggestions we're going to have to try.
Running.
But
Running is one suggestion. I mean, I do it, but not because I love it.
yes,
I really envy people. Like Catherine was telling us how much, what positive impact it has. First of all, I applaud her for running.
right.
Two, I applaud her for the introspection that allows her to see that it's doing good. When I'm done, I'm just like, I hated that.
I'm with you.
Got to do it again.
I'm with you. But along those lines, big thanks to, of course, Catherine, Chantel, and Amanda behind the scenes helping to make production happen today. And thanks for all their best practices on how to cope, how to get through this life. But part of
No
that,
doubt.
to your point, is celebrating the little things. But also the big things, such as big shows. And today, Greg, see what I did there? Today,
That was pretty good, Scott. I'm impressed.
we've got one of our longest running series, one of our most popular series, Supply Chain Today and Tomorrow with Mike Griswold from Gartner. So today, Greg, we're going to be
Yes, Scott.
gaining Mike's key takeaways from the 2022 Supply Chain Top 25, which publishes May 26th, just around the corner.
Wow.
It's always full of interesting insights and research from our friends at Gartner. We're going to be touching on the upcoming Supply Chain Symposium, as well as the academic landscape serving industry, right? Building and maintaining that talent pipeline. So, Greg, pretty big show, huh?
It's crazy. It feels like we just talked about that. The years aren't passing, they're evaporating. Right? It feels like we just talked about the top 25, doesn't it?
Doesn't it, though? Well, the Gartner team don't stop. So we've
True.
got a fresh list out just in a couple weeks. And, of course, Mike Griswold here with us today. We're going to say hello to a few folks. We got a ton of folks that are commenting. Hey, let us know, folks, where you are in the world. We love to connect the dots there.
All right.
Really quick, Greg, before we
Yes, Scott.
shout out to a few folks, we got 3 quick events we want to share. Hey, join Greg and I and over 1,300 of your dearest friends across the world for our May 18th Supply Chain and Procurement Awards for 2022. It's easy. All right. We've got a link in the comments we're going to drop. Most of those folks will be dialed in via LinkedIn, and come join us to celebrate successes across the globe while powering a very noble mission with
Amen.
our nonprofit friends at Hope for Justice. By the way, Greg, we're going to talk about the Supply Chain Symposium today. Tim Nelson with Hope for Justice is going to be at Gartner's event. Sure is. So that is really cool.
It is.
May 10th, next week, Greg, we've got, we're joined up with our friends at Six River Systems, how to solve 3 common peak season challenges. Greg, what's one thing folks should look for here?
Well, you asked me before what I thought the top peak season challenge is. And for the last 2 years, last 2 peak seasons anyway, this year and last year's, I'd have to say lead time and how to cope with that. First of all, order earlier.
Yep.
Right. But what's interesting is I'd love to run the whole peak season, coming peak season issues around in front of Mike and see what he thinks, because it is going to be challenging. We know it was challenging last year. We got companies who are literally going to sell this year what they meant to receive for Christmas peak season last year because it came too late. So it's going to be a really, weird season. And, we, of course, expect to see some shifts in demand. We're already starting to see some of that. And
That's right.
And in the economy. So it's going to be fascinating.
Keep it weird.
Another dynamic, right?
Yes. Keep it weird, supply chain. Just
Yeah,
blatantly
right.
stealing from Austin there. But hey, folks, join us May 10th for what promises to be a great conversation. May 24th, we're going to be talking about the world-class warehouses and what are the 10 competencies that fuel. As we talked last Monday, Greg, a lot of them, we're not going to spend much time on the usual suspects, and we're going to focus more on the key differentiators. So join us May 24th as we partner with our friends from ShipHawk.
Break out your notebook, your iPad, or your Remarkable.
That's right.
To make a list.
And your measuring stick too. May 24th. Okay. So Greg, we're going to say hello to a few folks. And I want to start with Brenda Allen is back. Now we've really enjoyed Brenda's participation on our live streams, but guess what?
No, you did not get a sample.
Brenda was kind enough to send Brenda and Ken Allen was kind enough to send us like a sampler pack. And
so they must have found that big old power machine, whatever they were looking for, right?
Whatever they were looking for, some electrical component. But we're big condiment fan folks here in the Luton family, and their sauce is delicious. I hadn't tried the seasoning yet, but the sauce is really, really good. So Brenda, thank you so much. You're too kind, and we look forward to hearing your take on everything that Mike Griswold with Gartner shares here today.
Kenny Bob is a new twist on a Southern name. I've heard Billy Bob, right?
Right.
Jimmy Joe, but never Kenny Bob.
That's right. That is right. So welcome today, Brenda. Great to have you, and thanks again. Catherine's tuned in. Of course, she was sharing her running.
Fresh off a run, I'm sure.
That's right. Gene Pledger from Northern Alabama. Good old NA. Gene Pledger is back with us. Gene, hope this finds you well. Juan Espinoza is here today. Juan, let us know where you're dialed in from via LinkedIn. Great to see you. Hey, James LePage is with us. Toronto, Canada, via LinkedIn. Greg,
yes.
Ever been to Toronto?
I have many times. So I did a lot of work with companies in Canada when I was up there. So let me see. I'm trying to think. Oh my gosh, I just completely blanked on it. They used to be called the Ace Hardware of Canada until Ace Hardware moved to Home Hardware.
Really?
Right? Home Hardware in St. John, which is a suburb of Toronto. So yes, I have been there many times.
Welcome in, James. And James, we can't talk about what your Blue Jays did to my Braves back in the early 90s. So there were some tough teams there. Michael Avra, of course, one of our
kind of holding on to that, aren't you?
We don't hold any grudges for too long, 50 years or so. That's my limit. Mike Avra is back with us from Sandy Springs, one of our faves around here. And finally, Natalie Christian is back with us. Great to have you here today, Natalie. I want to say she's in the Charlotte area, I believe. So, Natalie, great to see you here today.
It's a good memory.
Yeah, we try. Take my ginkgo biloba. It helps. All right.
I keep forgetting that.
But you know what, Greg? As much fun as I have chatting with you, we have got the one and only Mike Griswold with Gartner for his monthly appearance. And with that said, want to officially welcome him in. Mike Griswold, Vice President Analyst with Gartner. Mike, good morning. How you doing?
Hey, everyone. I'm great. Thanks. The rain has stopped here in Boise. The sun is out. The grandkids want to go swimming today. So
all right.
It's a good day.
Wonderful. It sounds like it. You paint a beautiful picture. And I don't know why, but we're just geared. There's something about our brains as humans. We're geared to start every conversation with weather observations. I don't know what it is, but it's what we were trained to do. Must have.
Yes.
So Mike and Greg, I missed an opportunity with my kids this morning. Today is Star Wars Day, right? May the 4th be with you.
Oh my gosh.
And I forgot to use that.
How did Ben let you miss that?
Seriously. So don't worry, I'm gonna make it up when I pick them up from school this afternoon.
Oh boy.
But
Dad
Mike,
jokes and Star Wars.
You bet. Yep. They go hand in hand like Oreo and milk, right? But Mike, I want to start with you being Star Wars Day. Are you a big fan? You have one of your favorite Star Wars movies. Tell us a little bit.
So I would probably best be described as a casual fan. I date myself because, when the first ones I saw were actually ended up being the middle three, right? When
Okay.
they first came out in the theaters. My first experience to a movie cliffhanger was the end of The Empire Strikes Back with this like Han Solo
Yeah.
is frozen. Well, I got to wait how long now to figure out what happens to him?
Right.
But I would in today's environment, I would probably describe myself actually. I have actually enjoyed some of the kind of spin-offs. I really liked Rogue One. I really liked The Mandalorian. So
Yes.
the last three Star Wars were okay for me. But I mean, to me, one of my favorites is actually Rogue One.
Agreed. As much as we put Greg the initial trilogy kind of enshrine them in a museum and really celebrate it. I think some of these spinoffs like Rogue One, like The Mandalorian, I think I like them better than Return of the Jedi. Right? I remember seeing Return of the Jedi in theaters, and I was like, man, Ewoks and some other things. It just didn't do it for me. But Greg, how about you?
Well, I liked the first three, and then there was such a big gap till anything else that honestly I haven't watched many of the others. And then they kind of went off the rails with the cartoony ones, the one with that odd speaking beast.
Yes,
right. So irritating.
Jar Jar Binks.
Fozzie the Bear. Yes, Jar Jar Binks, which was the voice of Fozzie the Bear. I did not realize that was his previous career. But I became somewhat knowledgeable for a short time because it was just so perfect, the age of my next older brother, and he was an absolute fanatic. He had all the toys, was wisely bought several of the action figures, bought two, and kept them in their boxes. I mean, let's think. This was the '80s, gang. People didn't realize you did that stuff then. I can't even imagine. I think that's his retirement plan is those things. But I do remember. I got to tell you, I do remember my mom. There had been other movies, Battlestar Galacticas and things like that, that had come out, and they were awful. Science fiction movies were traditionally pretty awful.
Right.
And I remember my mom asking, do you want to go see this Star Wars thing? This is literally what I said. I remember exactly what was in front of us in the car when she asked me that. I said, nah, probably just another dumb, just another dumb science fiction movie. Well, my brother really wanted to see it, so I had to see it. And I'm thankful that I did.
Who would have known, though? Who would have known that Hollywood history was made and it create legions of fans around the world? It really is fascinating to look back. And there's lots of documentaries online now about all the challenges of making, the original three, which is really cool. Let's see what some folks out in the skyboxes are saying. Natalie says, I may be one of the very few that has not seen one Star Wars movie in its entirety. How about that?
So worth it.
So worth it.
So worth it. I mean, it is.
Yeah, check it out, Natalie. You got to check it out. We got to recruit you to the team. Sheldon says, and Sheldon, I like your new headshot, says Revenge of the Sith and The Mandalorian for him. Those are a couple of his favorites. Those are great picks there. Good afternoon. Let's see. Lauren Laurentiou, maybe. If I got that wrong, let us know. But welcome. Let us know where you're dialed in from. Great to have you here. Thank you so much. So James, as I was giving him a shout out to his Blue Jays earlier, says, thank you. But he got us twice, and that's true. 91 and 92. That is very true. Those are some really good teams.
You can thank my classmate Joe Carter for that.
He's your classmate, really?
Way ahead of my time, of course. But he went to Wichita State. Yeah, he played ball at Wichita State.
How about that? And right on cue, Mike Aver says Joe Carter destroyed us, and that's right. He had a big part of that Toronto offense. Okay. So we may have to circle back to some Star Wars references throughout today's session because it is May the 4th. Be with you. But let's get down to business. And Mike, one of our favorite things, Greg and the whole team here, we all love lists. But of course, the Supply Chain Top 25 is a really cool yearly project. It generates a ton of discussion. But before we kind of talk about some key takeaways, talk to us, if you would, maybe kind of pull the green curtain back. What's your favorite part of the process, and what's some of the feedback you get from the market?
So before COVID, we had always done the reveal. Greg will know this, at a big dinner at our supply chain event, whether that was in Phoenix at different venues, and going through and revealing the list live and having groups of tables kind of be happy when they see their name, and hearing people cheering when they see where they landed, even companies that got into the list for the very first time and maybe we're at 25 or 24, to hear the excitement from those folks. And ultimately when you start getting up into the top 5, right, and people haven't seen their name called yet, it's kind of like, in some ways it's a different spin on the draft, but I miss that, right? I miss having kind of that excitement. I mean, we've transitioned to a reveal via webinar. From an attendance perspective, we reach a lot more people. From a feedback we get on the webinar itself, it scores very, very well. So it's a successful way for us to deliver it, but it doesn't have that personal kind of reaction. And you obviously can't see people's reactions, and sometimes that's a good thing, right, when people don't land where they wanted to land. But that excitement around where are we going to be, and I miss that from the in-person events. In terms of why do people tell us they care about the top 25, there's really 2 reasons, and they haven't changed. They have, I think, grown in importance. So the very first reason we hear, and in some ways it goes to what I hope we get to near the end of the session around our university top 25, is it is an incredible weapon for talent. Being able to say, hey, we were so-and-so in Gartner's global supply chain top 25. If you include our 5 masters, being able to say, hey, we're one of the 30 best supply chains in the world, according to Gartner at least. Come work for us, right? Or stay with us. It's a great weapon in the challenge that people have in terms of attracting talent. The second way people use it is really an internal celebration / how can we continue to fund our supply chain? Now, I would argue that's become a little bit less because of the pandemic, and the supply chain has rocketed to the head of the line when it comes to funding anyway. But people would tell us, hey, when we're in the top 25, I can go internally and say, hey, if we want to stay here, we need to invest in the supply chain. If we want to catch so-and-so, right, we need to invest in our supply chain. So those are the 2 big reasons that people, tell us that they care about the top 25.
Love that. And Greg, I'll circle you in just a moment. I want to say hello to Nabil. Great to have you here, Nabil. Let us know where you're tuned in from. Haidang, I believe. And if I got that wrong, just let me know. But great to have you here. Let us know where you're tuned in from as well. And finally, Greg, our production team got a big kick out of your Fozzie Bear reference with Jar Jar Binks, just so you know.
Did they?
Greg,
okay.
Greg, how do you, led and owned a wide variety of companies through your journey, as Mike kind of alluded to. How did you use the top 25 lists?
It was a great example for companies to strive toward. So very often the top 25 are manufacturers, and having worked so much with retail and distribution, particularly distribution, we're not at all forward thinkers in terms of supply chain. Mike's trying not to make a face. But it was a great, hey, you could be here too, and here are some of the foundational things that you can do. I just think they are role models of supply chain, if you want to call it that. These companies that really, really strive to be excellent, that do things that are not only profitable and high performing, but fair and good for humanity at the same time. And and it was that's probably the way that I used it. And then, of course, to inspire, because we were a technology provider, a solution provider, to inspire our product people to say, hey, we could solve this problem. Apple and the usual top 5, right? They spend billions, sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars on their supply chains. And that's not an everyman kind of expenditure, but technology is the path for every leader, every company, every man, every woman, whatever, to that same kind of performance. And we used it particularly at our company to help us go, everyone could use that. We need to democratize that and bring that to smaller companies in a way that they can absorb and apply it.
Love that.
Yeah,
Mike?
I'm sure, Greg, you saw before you came to the right side, not the dark side. You came to the right side of the microphone.
Yeah.
I mean, and you'll know who I'm talking about. We every year we have a number of technology providers who, when the list comes out, right, say, hey, we've got 19 of Gartner's supply chain top 25 companies as clients.
Right.
I think to your point, it does help reinforce a technology provider's story, because we have so many diverse companies from an industry perspective make up the top 25.
Right.
So it is, and I think frankly, there's probably companies that don't take enough advantage of that, quite frankly, to be able to say, hey, we can solve multiple problems across multiple industries, as demonstrated by this list of clients we have that run really good supply chains.
Yep.
Yeah.
So to everyone in the cheap seats, hey, we'd love to hear how you've used the list, or how maybe your team has celebrated making the list. You name it. Let us know your reaction to the Gartner Supply Chain Top 25 each year. All right, so I want to shift gears a bit. Of course, the 2022 Top 25 is still in the wraps. May 26th is when that will be released. But the good thing is, Greg, is Mike Griswold has agreed to share some key takeaways from the whole process and all the research and whatnot. So good things come in threes. So what are 3 good key takeaways that you've had from this year's list, Greg? Mike?
Yeah, so similar to last time, I wanted to bring notes so that I didn't mess things up. So I have some notes here. I'm not multitasking, because people who know me know that I challenge with single tasking, much less multitasking. But let me start with maybe just a couple of factoids, just to kind of set the stage. So we've been doing this. This is going to be year 19, and I don't want to have people's eyes glaze over by going through the methodology. But basically, every company we run through the methodology ends up with what we call a composite score, and that a perfect score is 10. Right. So if you were number one in all the metrics, you would have a composite score of 10. One of the things we talk about in the top 25 is how do we get people to raise the bar for everybody else relative to the supply chain. So if Greg's supply chain is better than mine, right, how do I make my supply chain as good as Greg's, right? How do I kind of get to the place that Greg is? So just a couple things to think about. If I look at our top 25 and our 5 masters, so our top 30 companies, the average composite score is 4.57, which is out of a grand total of 10. To put it in perspective, the number one company, their composite score is just a little bit over 6. All right. So it's not like anyone's sniffing 10. Right. The only reason I say that is that 4.57 is up 11% from last year. What that means is if your supply chain stays the same, you will drop in the top 25. Your supply chain has to get better every single year.
Can you say that again for the people in the back who might not have heard you?
11% better or higher composite score this year versus last year. Our top 5 companies, their composite score is 9% higher than last year. Wow. And to get at the number 25 spot, right, if you want to be company 25, you need a composite score of 3.15. That is up 13% from last year.
So it's harder to get into the top 25 than it's ever been.
Than ever before.
Wow.
So the only reason I share those numbers is not to bore people. It's just to say that, your supply chain, whatever it is, however you define it, has got to get better every single year, regardless of whether you want to land in the top 25 or not. It just has to get better, because everyone around you, their supply chains are getting better. And the data would tell us they're getting better, not just a little bit, they're getting kind of majorly incrementally better year over year. So that's huge. But really, Scott, to your question, we actually broke tradition here, and we have 4 macro trends. Typically we have 3. I will give you the 3 that I think will resonate the most. The first is, and I really like this one, chief supply chain officers turning and evolving into chief ecosystem officers. So a different take on a CEO. And we can go into each of these a little bit deeper, but think of the supply chain, the chief supply chain officer moving into an environment where they're managing an ecosystem, both internally and externally. Excuse me, that's one. Second is, and this will not be a surprise, what we're referring to as authentic achievement of your ESG agenda. What that means in a nutshell is people are now starting to keep score. If you said you were going to do something by 2020, guess what? You better have done it, or you're going to get held accountable. If you want to do something by 2025 and people don't think that's aggressive enough, you're going to hear about it. So just to put in perspective, in our top 25 methodology, we have an ESG component, which is the accumulation of up to 10 points. 63% of our top 25 companies have a perfect score of 10. That is up about 30% from last year. So ESG and kind of doing what you say you're going to do relative to this, and it's more than just the environment. It's around DE&I. It's around other social types of stances. People are now listening and they're remembering, which I think in the past people listened and kind of had other things to worry about. Now people are going to hold you accountable for what you say you're going to do on the ESG side. And the third one, and some of this will dovetail a little bit into the college university stuff, is what we're referring to as human-centric digital automation. And Greg will really like this one. This is where we're trying to understand the balance between what do we want a machine to do, because it does it faster and smarter, but what do we still need humans to do to value add to that process or value add to that decision? We see in this whole idea of human-centric, we're seeing new ways of working. We're seeing new ways of people going back to work. We're seeing new skills emerge. What we cannot ignore is the role, to Greg's earlier comment, we cannot ignore the role that technology plays. And if you ignore it, you ignore it at your own peril. The top 25 companies have figured out, where do we insert people to get us better decisions? And where do we let automation and technology make those decisions for us? So those are the 3 big ones that we'll be talking about a little bit in the webinar. A colleague and I are doing a presentation just on lessons from leaders at Symposium in Orlando. But that's kind of a flavoring of what do we see these 30 companies, right? Our 5 masters in our top 25. What are they working on and what are they thinking about? Those are the 3 big things.
Wonderful. And I love that last one, that human-centric digital automation. Greg, I'm going to get your response here in just a minute. But first, Natalie says, Gartner lists and quadrants are beneficial for benchmarking current state. The elements that set companies apart are great conversation starters within our strategy meetings. Excellent. Thank you for that, Natalie. I really appreciate that. James, yes, lots of tough scorers. You're right. And I got to clarify. I got to clarify. The Blue Jays beat the Braves in 92, but the Braves didn't get past the Phillies in 93. I had a little slip of a little brain lapse there. So the Blue Jays beat the Phillies for their second World Series back then. So, but James, congrats either way. And then Arjun asks a great question, and we'll see if we can't get Mike's take maybe throughout the conversation. Retailers that really show real resilience, good resilience throughout their supply chain. So we'll see if we can't get a take from Mike on that in a moment. But Greg, those big 3 key takeaways, I bet you love all of them, but I bet that last one resonates with you as well.
Yeah, it does. And I think also the word authentic added to ESG initiatives. That really stood out at me. I mean, for so many years, and Kelly Barner loves to talk about this, and she's so right. Companies have paid lip service to ESG initiatives, and I think all three of those things, particularly that those have come to the fore, come from the fact that over the last 2 years, 26 months, right, just over 26 months, supply chain has come out of the shadows, right? We asked for a seat at the table. We asked to be recognized. We asked not to have to fight for the funds to sustain and improve our supply chains every year, and we got it in spades. Now supply chain is mentioned as often and sometimes more often than sales in companies' quarterly and annual reports, right? It's mentioned more often than marketing, almost 100% of the time in annual reports. There is nowhere to hide. Not that supply chain professionals were trying to hide anywhere, but there is sort of a subconscious comfort in knowing that if I up, nobody is going to notice, right? And now everyone is going to notice. And it's not just people at your company. It's not just your suppliers. It's not just your customers. It's the consumers. Consumers now have so much awareness to supply chain that they're the ones holding companies. They're holding companies accountable for the authenticity of their efforts, for the efficiencies that require automation, and for the type of rapid critical thinking decisions that humans are so good at making. So it's great that we are seeking that balance. Honestly, that's a little surprising to me. I didn't think anyone was kind of really seriously looking at that. So that's great. Totally expected, of course, from Gartner, Mike, but still surprising and encouraging that you guys are looking for that equilibrium between what machines should do, what computers should do, and what people should do. So I love that.
One of the things that has definitely happened, if I bring us to that ESG kind of macro trend that we see, we've actually reached the point now where we're publishing on the whole idea of how not to get accused of greenwashing, right? That never would have been a topic that we would have written about 2 or 3 years ago, because we hadn't reached the point where people were actually concerned about what they were reading about companies and their ESG agenda. Now that people are really interested in what you're saying around your ESG agenda, it's really important that you say the right things and you actually can do what you say. So this idea of greenwashing and how not to get caught up in that is a really hot topic for us.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'll raise is we've got, and we're not the only folks with this data, but depending on who you look at, there is a growing, at least, response from consumers to surveys that says anywhere from 40 to almost 50% of consumers will pay more for a more sustainable product. Now, the cynical side of me says, I don't know that I've seen that yet actually happen with their wallets.
Right.
But even if a percentage of that is kind of overstating, if we're saying the number actually is 30%, that is still a significant number of people that are going to vote with their wallet around sustainability. And I think the other element that we even us at Gartner don't want to lose sight of is we've got this whole area of research that we call ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and we have, I think rightfully so, expended a ton of energy on the E. And when you look at what people outwardly communicate, 90% of it is around the E. But what we're also hearing is there's as much customer thoughts around the S and the G as there is the E. And I think my advice to companies is you need to think about all three of those, or at least the E and the S. The G can be kind of nebulous in terms of what does that what's governance really actually mean? There is no ambiguity around the environmental and the social piece. And while I think it definitely makes sense to continue to focus on the E, I think some folks are missing an opportunity to talk about what they're doing in the S's, right? Whether that's the makeup of your board, right? Around how diverse is your board, how diverse is your senior leadership team, how well are women and other underrepresented demographics, how well are they represented in your leadership team? We're writing a ton of stuff. We have a huge DE&I quantitative study that's going to be coming out shortly. The S is the area where I think people need to start thinking a little bit more about. We've talked a lot about my basketball coaching background and putting girls in position where you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And the S is an area where organizations are uncomfortable and they have to get past that because people are going to start pressing them on the S's.
Right.
Yeah.
Well said. And we just had a live stream yesterday with Kelly Barner, Greg, and our friends from Risk Methods. And we were talking about the Uyghurs, I think is how we pronounce it. I've also heard it pronounced the Uyghurs, and how supply chains now with the passage of the act, they're really having to prove their innocence. And, Mike and Greg, Mike, to your point specifically, those are some really tough conversations to have. But gosh, if we don't have them, not only are we missing a massive opportunity to make our supply chains more resilient, but much more importantly, we basically implicitly support what's going on in that part of the world. So well said, Mike. ESG, it only is going to grow, not just in lip service, but in true investment and action and results.
Sorry, and this will be my last thing. And this is kind of the convergence of sustainability and technology. When we release the report, you'll read some examples from some of our companies in our top 25 that are using technology like satellite technology and geolocation technology to do things as cool as mapping deforestation as it relates to palm oil and palm trees. So there is this convergence, I think, of not only the environmental aspect, but the technological advances we've made to help people in one part of the world monitor other areas and parts of the other world. I mean, if you think about it, even 8 or 9 years ago, it would have been easy to say, well, I can wash my hands because I can't see this forest that's 3,000 miles away. Well, guess what? Now you can.
Right.
So that excuse is off the table. What are you going to do in some of those important areas? So we're starting to see the use of technology start to come into more and more areas around, particularly the environmental part of ESG.
Love it. All right, Greg, I'm going to get your response, and then we're going to be talking about these talent pipelines feeding industry. But really quick, Delvis, I believe Delvis is tuned in from Puerto Rico. So great to have you here at Delvis. I think that's the flag that just doesn't transcribe over to the stream. So great to see you.
So the blue matters on that flag, by the way, because Cuba's flag is remarkably similar with a different color of blue.
Really?
Yeah.
Man, I learned something new with Greg White every single day, Mike.
I have a lot of Puerto Rican friends, and they clarified that for me.
Sheldon says, the Gartner Top 25 validates effort. In many instances, it's difficult to quantify supply chain benefits such as ESG, which Mike was speaking to a minute ago, because all of this is a much easier sell to corporate. Excellent point there. Mike Aver says companies are now putting their goals and dates in writing, and that is a huge shift from 5 to 10 years ago.
Sure.
And finally, James, I love the environment aspects information. I feel it's very overlooked. So despite some of our observations, how there's getting a lot more attention, and we still have folks and practitioners that feel it doesn't get enough attention yet. All right. So Greg, Mike has shared a wealth of knowledge with us. Anything else stick out to you before we move on to talking universities and schools and have a little fun?
Yeah, it's 100% the consumer's responsibility to make sure that supply chains are sustainable and fair, right? The E and the S. If we don't drive, if we don't really, to Mike's point, if we don't really vote with our wallets, which we don't today. So I'm sure the numbers have changed, but a year or so ago when we were looking at these numbers, huge numbers of people said they would vote with their wallets and only 14% did. Mike, by the way, those numbers have probably moved up. But if we don't vote with our wallets, the companies will not change. But I also think that it's important for companies to understand, because look, self-interest is the best interest. it guides you to do the right thing. I think if companies understand that dealing with the Uyghurs or other, I mean, there are exponentially worse slavery problems than the Uyghurs. It's just the Uyghurs are in China, and so many companies work in China, right? India has its own share of problems. It has the lion's share of problems, frankly. But if you understand that creates fragility in your supply chain, because CBP could just do what they did about this time last year and say, you are guilty unless proven innocent. Nothing coming from Xinjiang province will come into the United States unless you can absolutely prove that no slave labor was used to produce those goods. I love that approach, by the way, and I think we need to do it more often. So when companies recognize that the E and the S, environmental and social issues, impact the fragility of their supply chain and impact their top line more than their bottom line, because, by the way, even if you reduce your margins by a full point because you have an ESG initiative, if you don't sell it to begin with because people know you're a bad actor, you lose all of those gross margin points, not just one. So I think that's where companies are, that's where their heads are starting to go, the smart ones, right? The ones that are also improving their supply chains by 10% every year. They're improving those other initiatives as well.
Well, and the good news is we are seeing those numbers about voting with wallet. We're seeing movement, and we're seeing movement across generations. Not as much as what Greg and Mike are pointing out to, but hey, we'll take what we can get, right? Because it does lie with the consumer. Okay, I want to switch gears here we recently sat down with Dr. Brian Fugit with the University of Arkansas, which it has been for quite some time. I think at least last year, at least maybe a couple of years, the number one ranked supply chain management program here in the U.S. And they're doing some really special things. I met with Dr. Fugit and three of his outstanding, brilliant students. So Mike, a question for you. Are you involved in those rankings, and anything you can share?
Yes. So I have two people on my team, Dana Stifler and Caroline Chumukoff, who run our university top 25 program. It's an every other year exercise. It's coming up this year, and this year we're going to do it a little bit differently from the standpoint that we typically had, because of timing, we would run it as a webinar. But for the first time, we're going to do the reveal live at our symposium in June. And then, similar to my top 25, once Dana and Caroline do the reveal, they will the note will be published that has all of the rankings. So we're really excited about that. That's the first week in June. I don't know if it's Monday or Tuesday, the 6th or the 7th, but it's I'm sure if someone goes to Gartner.com, or if they're not going to be at the event, they can get a link to it. But I did ask, because I saw that you wanted to talk about this, Scott. I did reach out to Dana and Caroline, and I have and I hate reading to people, but I wanted to make sure I captured this. So I have some notes that I'd like to kind of just share, some bullets,
Sure.
and then we can react to them. And the last one, I've read it like 6 times, and I'm interested in people's reactions to it. Okay, so the first is, with the pandemic, we've seen what Dana refers to as program types colliding. So typically on-campus programs went remote, hybrid went fully remote, and programs that were already remote really thrived. So I think the first message is these successful college and universities have figured out different ways to deliver education and deliver it well. That's my first takeaway. The second is we're seeing more risk management and sustainability courses in the curriculum, especially at the graduate level. That's great, right? I think the risk and sustainability, two incredibly hot topics for us. I think maybe as a teaser, and I don't know whether Arkansas needs to worry or not, but up-and-coming programs are challenging the older and established upper Midwest and coastal supply chain elites.
Ooh,
so we'll see how that shakes out. Yep.
Yeah.
Salaries are going to be higher than in 2020. Undergrads in 2020 got $58,569 roughly. top 10 undergraduate programs average 63.
Wow.
And this is the one that I read 6 times. Everyone needs to be sitting down. We expect to see the same 100% placement of all grads within 3 months of graduation.
Wow.
Exactly. I mean, I looked at that and said, it's got to be a typo. But, I mean, we've talked a lot the last several months about, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, supply chain is the place to be. I mean, it really is. And the fact that you can almost write your own ticket coming out of school with a supply chain degree, I think is incredibly exciting. I do worry a little bit around, is there a bubble? And that, if I'm a freshman, is that going to be available when I'm still a senior? I think the answer is yes. But to me, this is the best time I can remember to be in the supply chain.
Agreed. So much there. We could do a couple hours just on your observations there. Folks,
doubt.
We dropped the link to the Gartner Supply Chain Symposium in the comments. That's June 6th through the 8th, you bet. I'll be down there with our friends at InterSystems as part of one of the roundtables. Looking forward to that. Mike, who knows? Maybe you give me a golf lesson. Yes.
He'll give you a golf lesson. It'll cost you way more than a golf lesson from a pro, though.
I've learned a long time ago not to wager on any of my athletic prowess, or lack thereof.
Good thinking.
But so really quick, Amanda, Chantel, Catherine, if we can find that conversation we had with University of Arkansas, if we could drop that in the comments, it was fascinating. We just sat down, Mike, with Texas Christian University this week. Looking forward to that. And Greg, one of the observations there, and I'm going to get your take and respond to what Mike just shared. Both of the students we interviewed, Ann and Jacob, both of them already had positions locked in with Dell and with Frito-Lay, but their specific job positions of what they'd be doing was still kind of evolving, which I found to be really interesting. Kind of goes back to that 100% thing that Mike was sharing. But Greg, what are you seeing? What are some of the? Go ahead, Mike.
So real quick, Scott, not to give too much away, but both Dell and Pepsi, which owns Frito-Lay, both of them are top 25 companies. So he's landing in a really good spot.
Yeah,
no kidding. No kidding. That's really good news, isn't it, Greg? But what'd you hear there, Greg?
Well, I think as I think I wish I was going to school for supply chain now, honestly. I don't know how the rest of us got into supply chain. I kind of fell backwards into it. It wasn't a profession. It was something that, depending on the industry or depending on the level of supply chain you were at, if you were a salesperson who couldn't sell, you got to work in the warehouse, right? If you were the dumb brother-in-law of the owner, you wound up in supply chain. I mean, it wasn't a job even back in the, except for the very, very highest positions. It wasn't a job that, one, was interdisciplinary. It was mostly about transportation. And two, was something that people sought out. It was sort of a job that you fell into. So in that short 3-decade span, we've seen it turn into a profession like sales or like accounting, right? Or finance. And that's encouraging. And we've also seen so many schools, not only add programs, but to challenge the status quo. And, Mike probably shouldn't name, but I will, the Stanford, MIT, Michigan State, and Penn State kind of quadrumvirate of supply chain universities. And there are dozens and dozens of others that are very, very good, and also modernizing their programs. Because part of the challenge, I work with a number of universities, and part of the program, the issue that academics talk about is that by the time they're able to put it into the curricula, it's already outdated. And that's more, the techniques and the methodologies, that's more and more true today. For instance, there is one phrase that you should forget, students. If it is ever said to you by any in any discipline of supply chain, the term "all other things being equal," forget that. All other things are never equal in supply chain. So that is one of the biggest fallacies, one of the biggest false presumptions of supply chain, is that if everything else goes well, this works.
Right.
Well, yeah, that was never the case, right, Mike? And now even less so. And now you're even more exposed because, as we talked about earlier, now everybody knows who you are and what you do, and they're watching you for, because of your impact on the brand esteem and the reputation of the company.
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple of things. I mean, I like you, Greg. I kind of did the nesty plunge into supply chain. Right, it was an accident.
Yeah.
And even if you think about just the evolution of the word, right? I think you and I, when we were first involved, it was distribution, logistics, and transportation. We didn't even use the S word, right? It hasn't been a supply chain for very long, right? And then if we look at the macro trends, now we've just kind of got chief supply chain officers, and now we're even trying to evolve them. So we've come a long way pretty quickly. My other observation is, I think there is this is, and I'll preface this by saying this is a gut reaction. Dana and Caroline may have a different perspective because they actually do the work around the study. My gut reaction is the supply chain degree and having accomplished a degree is more important than where the degree came from. So if you went to number 10, whoever that might be, right? I don't know that that's going to hinder you if it's not like whoever's number one, even if it is Arkansas again, right? So I'm encouraging people that if you think you want to go into the supply chain, you don't have to go to Stanford, you don't have to go to MIT, you don't have to go to those places. If you can find a place that has a good curriculum for you in the areas that are important to you, I think there will be opportunities for you, right? This 100% placement is just not the people from MIT.
Right.
It's the people that have a degree, kind of regardless of where it came from.
Yeah, North Carolina A&T. I mean, it's everyone, right? I mean, it is everyone. So
so
that's
pick
a good point.
Pick it, get it in gear, apply yourself.
Yeah.
Look for new opportunities, get out of your comfort zone, make all of that part of your educational experience, and you will have a job. Hey, we only got a couple more minutes with Mike. Mike, really quick. If you were standing up the Mike Griswold School of Supply Chain Management, what's one quick thing that you would make sure is part of that offering?
I think I would build upon some of the new areas that we're seeing around risk management. And I think to Greg, I love the way Greg said, nothing is created equally. That should just be punted out of the Webster dictionary. It would be around resiliency. How do we teach this idea of resiliency? And I think it is as much an organizational dynamic as it is a personal dynamic, quite frankly. The analogy I'll use is, I'll bring us back to basketball, right? The men and the women's season ended, and one of the worst things that I think's been invented is this idea of the transfer portal, right? There were something like 1,200 kids in the transfer portal in men's basketball.
Wow.
I read a story. There was a kid that averaged 0.5 points per game at his college team is in the transfer portal. It's because things got hard for him at the school he was at. So there is an element of organizational resilience that we need to foster in people, but we also need to find a way to instill some personal resilience in people as well. Because if you don't have personal resilience, it's hard for you to move that into an organization. But the resilience piece would be my number one curriculum topic in my fictional university.
I love it. I bet you'd build quite a university, Mike Griswold. If your popularity here is any indication, you'd have full enrollment. All right, so Mike, as much as I hate to close our chapter here, I know you've got a slew of things to get to this afternoon. Hopefully you get a chance to go swimming with your grandkids. That sounds like a lot of fun. But how can folks connect with you and Gartner?
LinkedIn, and then again, shoot me emails, mike.griswold@gartner.com. Look forward to hearing from people.
It is just that easy. Well, I hope to see you down in Florida in a few weeks. And thanks
Yes.
so much, as always, for the time you spend here with Greg and I.
My pleasure. Great to see everyone.
We'll
Thanks,
talk
Mike.
soon, Mike. Thank you. All right. Well, so Greg, all things being equal, that was one heck of a conversation.
Never not learning. Seriously, when Mike Griswold is around, you are never not learning. We learned some things behind the scenes, like his nickname, which I didn't know, and I've known Mike
a long time.
Not
more than 20 years. All right.
Not
so
more
that's
than
our
20
cap.
years.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. But a good long while. And kind of his perspective on all of this is so powerful as well. Can I tell you what I would pick that every student should know in coming out of supply chain? And that is that manufacturing is not the model for supply chain. There are 3 supply chains, 3 tiers of supply chain, and it's critical to understand the uniquenesses of each one of them. There is a manufacturing supply chain. There is a distribution. And by distribution, I don't mean just the distribution of goods. I mean distributors, right? Like the people who distribute food,
adult
and liquor,
beverages,
and hardware, and that sort of thing, to chains and small businesses and that sort of thing. And there is a retail supply chain, and the dynamics of each of those are distinctly different, and yet the universities almost solely teach, from a manufacturing perspective, the principles of supply chain. And the reason for that is, of course, because that's where they get their money from, right? And they build their research and they build their practices to help out those companies, like at Wichita State, Cargill, huge manufacturers. I can't even imagine who MIT and Stanford, but of course at Michigan State, it's the big automakers. So there are specialty areas, not just industries, but tiers of supply chain, and you need to understand the unique dynamics of each tier of the supply chain.
Well said. I love that. So, we were having a conversation yesterday. We hadn't published this yet, as I mentioned, with TCU, right? Great program. And Dr. Travis Tokar had to fill in for Dr. Morgan Swink, right? I think who leads the supply chain program at TCU. And there was a moment, Greg, much like, with your brilliant moments of brilliance around here, there was a moment that Travis was kind of speaking to our listeners. And he was really, and you could tell it's coming from a very genuine space. He was really telling supply chain practitioners around the world, hey, when you have those days where you're fighting with spreadsheets all day, or you're having debates with your colleagues, or, it's full of firefighting, whatever it is, man, keep your eyes on the prize. And more importantly, keep your eyes on this greater big picture impact that you are absolutely having. And it was such a, I can't wait to publish the episode, because it was such more powerfully stated than I just did there. And it was just a moment that stopped you in your tracks, because everyone needs to hear that. Right. So, but
in every role, truly, but particularly in supply chain, because it is, to Mike's previous points on this show, it is a lot of firefighting, and sometimes it's rewarding the arsonist. I'm so glad he, coined that phrase. But yes, I mean, you still are making progress, even if you're firefighting.
That's right.
Because otherwise, the house burns to the ground.
That's right. And also, like your point earlier, it's on the consumers. Our dear friend Scott Case with NRF told me out in Vegas back in January, hey, supply chains do what they're programmed to do. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. Leaders set priorities, and that's what supply chains do. They're built to execute. So as consumers, we can, based on our preferences and what we demand and what we're willing to do, we can have major impacts. I think Sheldon was speaking to that earlier. And that's going to be a big key, to your point, of unlocking a lot more progress with ESG initiatives and so much more. So a lot of good stuff there. Speaking of which, and good afternoon. Great to have you back from Texas, I believe. Evans Dispatching Logistics Supply Distribution. Kind of sounds like an index we track, right?
Yeah.
James says, you're totally right, Greg. I have extensive hospitality, hotel, restaurant background, and almost nothing in our curriculum was taught from a service-based perspective. Great point, James. Great point. I think James, I believe, is up for his next opportunity. So, folks, reach out to James, grab a cup of coffee. We've all been there. And James, let us know what you're looking for there. T Squared, Morgan State is a great program. The leader, Greg, of DEMSCA, the Diverse Manufacturing and Supply Chain Alliance. I cannot remember his name. He's going to kill me. David, Kevin Jackson, if you're out there, remind us. Well, so let's do it one better. Looks like our team. David Burton. Yes. David Burton.
I was thinking Burns. I don't know why. Yeah.
Close. David Burton is a graduate and does so much give back to Morgan State University. He's one of our great friends of the show. Y'all check out DEMSCA. I think it's demsca.org, DMSCA.org. But T Squared, great point, and great to have you here today. And finally, before we wrap, Natalie Christian says, I fell into supply chain answering the question, how do we raise fill rates above 90%? Today, well, before COVID, so yesterday, anything less than 97% is unreliable.
That's right.
How about that?
Yeah. I mean, it is amazing how many people, for this to have become a profession, it is amazing how many people kind of fell into it.
Yes. Right? Agreed. Okay. So, Greg, before we wrap here, we're just a couple minutes over, but we're about to wrap up. Great show with Mike Griswold. Loved all the comments. Mike's, we really need to book 4 hours with him each month. There's so much there to dive into. But Greg, what's one, beyond the fact that we got to strike all things being equal, and I even snuck it in, you didn't say anything. But beyond that, what's one key thing that folks got to take away from the last hour?
That the S in social is, in ESG is every bit as important as the E. That, there are so many lessons here today, but the one that jumped out at me so much, and the authentic application of ESG initiatives. I love that is such a huge part of the top 25 evaluation. And it's really encouraging to hear how many of the candidates for the top 25 and how many of the top 25 score 100% on that. Right. That's truly, truly impressive.
Excellent point there. And, speaking of which, all of ESG, be sure, folks, to check out Hope for Justice. They are, we talked about them on the front end. There are nonprofit partners that we're working together on our 2022 Supply Chain and Procurement Awards. And they're leading that noble mission to eradicate human slavery and global trafficking. And unfortunately, every part of the world, there's a lot of that exists. We got so much work to do. So y'all check it out. Doing great work. Be sure to join us May 18th as we reveal our winners. And Greg, that's we got about a 8-day head start on the top 25. I wonder if there's going to be some similarities between our winners.
We already know 2.
That's true.
I don't know if you noticed that. Those were obviously ones that are already there and that will stay, but we learned 2. So we kind of scooped that a little bit.
We did. Man, it's a great call out. Great call out. Hopefully Gartner's army of lawyers will not be coming after us. Who knows?
They'll be coming after Mike.
Right. That's right. Hey, really quick, Brenda Allen. Hey, thanks again for your generous gift. But she says, for small businesses, especially just getting started, you're at the mercy of who you are ordering from. But we're learning to navigate the supply chain. Thankful to one of your listeners who reached out to us a few weeks back. Hey, how about that? So thankful for the show. Brenda, thank you. And we look forward to learning more about your journey in the weeks and months ahead. Okay, folks, on behalf of our entire team, big thanks to Amanda, Catherine, and Clay, and Chantel behind the scenes helping make production happen. Big thanks to my colleague here, Greg White, who brought it today, as always. Big thanks to everyone in the comments. There are so many comments we couldn't get to. A lot of great stuff there, a lot of great stuff that we shared. But if you take one thing away, right? If you take one thing away, it's take action. Scott Luton challenging you to do good, to give forward, and to be the change that's needed here today. And with that said, we'll see you next time right back here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.